Unelected government staying in power for over a year and a half. Everything has been done undemocratically. Tens of thousands of political prisoners behind bars. We currently have over 100 members of parliament being held as political prisoners with no investigations, no trials. I think the biggest two pieces which seem to sort of trace back to ISI were that the protest movement, one, received a lot of funding. I suppose a lot of this was USAID as well. However, the one thing that a lot of the protests, you see that there were militants that infiltrated the protests. Without a doubt, these weapons had to have been supplied from somewhere in the subcontinent, and the only possible source is ISI. India has always been a good friend, and in the crisis, India has essentially saved my mother's life. I'm eternally grateful to Prime Minister Modi's government for saving my mother's life. You have Lashkar-e-Taiba operating freely now, and they've taken credit, and links have been found to their branch in Bangladesh for the recent terror attacks in Delhi.
So much for talking to me, and I really appreciate your time. The last time we spoke, you staunchly defended your mother, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and denied any wrongdoings. More than a year later, looking at how events have unfolded in Bangladesh, what's your assessment of the current situation? Do you still believe this was entirely politically motivated?
Well, look, our government, during the protests last year, yes, there was some mishandling of the protests initially. The protests turned violent. Our government attempted to stop the violence. But yes, there was certainly a political motivation to it. You've had an unelected government staying in power for over a year and a half. Everything has been done undemocratically. You still have tens of thousands of political prisoners behind bars. We currently have over 100 members of parliament being held as political prisoners with no investigations, no trials. So at this point, it definitely is a political coup, if you will.
Now, if we talk about like a Western pressure or a U.S. pressure, do you at any point or your mother ever receive any direct threats from any U.S. official? And if not explicit threats, were there any subtle forms of pressure from Washington in the lead up to the July 2024 events?
No, we've not received any threats whatsoever. The only slight issue was the U.S. was the only country that issued a negative statement on our 2024 elections, which our opposition boycotted. Other than that, the elections were regarded as peaceful by everyone. So there was no direct pressure, there were no threats, and we've never received any pressure or threats since. Now, of course, there is a completely new government in the U.S., and the situation is completely different.
So are you hopeful that, things might move in another direction with this new administration that took over this January in the United States?
Yes, we've seen a very distinct change in outlook. President Trump himself announced at a press conference earlier this year that the previous administration, through USAID, had spent millions of dollars on regime change in Bangladesh. He was referring to the protests last year. So I think the U.S. attitude has definitely changed, and they're certainly more concerned about the threat of terrorism and the rise of Islamism in Bangladesh than the previous administration was.
You're suggesting that there is a change from this regime. Has anyone tried to reach out to you from this new administration? Any U.S. officials from the State Department NSC, folks from the White House. Have you heard anything, or are you in talks with anyone?
I can't really disclose that right now.
Okay. You've suggested Pakistani ISI involvement in the protest movement. Can you provide specific evidence that the ISI assisted the student demonstrations in Bangladesh?
We've received bits and pieces of information, but I think the biggest two pieces which seem to sort of trace back to ISI were that the protest movement, one, received a lot of funding. I suppose a lot of this was USAID as well. However, the one thing that a lot of the protests, you see, that there were militants that infiltrated the protests, and many of them were armed. They were armed with firearms. Many of them were caught on video with firearms shooting. And without a doubt, these weapons had to have been supplied from somewhere in the subcontinent, and the only possible source is ISI.
Let's just, talk about India's role in this whole dynamics. What role do you believe India played during the crisis, and how do you assess New Delhi's current position on providing asylum to your mother?
India has always been a good friend, and in the crisis, India has essentially saved my mother's life. If she hadn't left Bangladesh, the militants, they had planned on killing her. So I'm eternally grateful to Prime Minister Modi's government for saving my mother's life. In terms of her should I continue? In terms of her extradition, look, for an extradition to happen, the judicial process has to be followed. What you have in Bangladesh is a government itself that's unelected, unconstitutional, and illegal. You have, in order to convict my mother, they amended laws to fast-track her trial, which you cannot amend laws without a parliament, so these laws were amended illegally. And then my mother was not allowed to hire her own defense attorneys. Her attorneys weren't even allowed into the courts. And you had the 17 judges terminated at the court before the trial, new judges appointed, some of whom who had absolutely no experience on the bench and were politically connected. So there was no due process whatsoever. And when there is such a case, extradition, no country is going to extradite when everything has been done illegally and without due process. So for extradition to happen, you have to have due process.
Right. Now, there have been persistent reports about corruption within your inner circle. Do you acknowledge that corruption existed among those close to your mother's government?
Corruption existed in Bangladesh, of course. Corruption, prior to my mother's government, Bangladesh was, during our opposition, the BNP's term, Bangladesh was ranked as the most corrupt country in the world. My mother's government reduced it. We fell out from being number one, we fell out of the top 10. It's not something you can eliminate overnight, but we also had the best economic growth in the history of the country. For much of my mother's term, Bangladesh was one of the top 5 fastest growing economies in the world. It was regarded as the next Asian tiger. It graduated from a least developed country to a developing country. Did corruption go away? No. But this level of development and economic growth would not have been possible with major corruption.
On the interim government at this point, what evidence can you provide that Dr. Muhammad Yunus lacks popular support? And if he doesn't have the country's backing, as you suggested, then who is propping up the current government in Bangladesh?
If Muhammad Yunus was popular, then why would he not just have held an election one election, and then run the country with legitimacy. He has held on to power for a year and a half because without holding an election, because he has absolutely zero popular support. The political party that the students formed, the NCP, in all the polling run in Bangladesh to date, within this government's term, they're polling at simply 2%. They've never gone above 2% popularity. So Yunus and the student party have almost no popularity. And that is why they've held on to power without an election.
Now, talking about the geopolitical timing of this whole play out, how do you explain the timing of these events given Bangladesh's deepening ties with China and expanding participation in the Belt and Road Initiative? What does your mother really make of this?
Our government's policy was to have friendly relations with all countries. So we pursued trade relations with China, with India, with the US. We didn't really take sides. So I don't think that really had anything to do with it. If anything, the Yunus regime has been trying to get much closer to China. They've had prominent state visits to China. Even our opposition, BNP, has been making direct overtures to China. So I don't think that for us, the Belt and Road Initiative was simply an economic initiative to facilitate transportation. I don't think that really had any bearing on this.
On the extradition request, coming back to it, will your mother really contest the extradition request from Bangladesh, and on what grounds? You did briefly mention about, the grounds, of course. And frankly, do you believe she can receive a fair trial in the current political climate in Bangladesh?
Not at all. This was a rubber stamp court. This was a kangaroo court. Right now, for the past year and a half, tens of thousands of political prisoners have been held without bail. So right now there is no rule of law in Bangladesh, and so justice is simply not possible. Someday when democracy returns, when rule of law returns, of course we will fight this. And there is absolutely no way this trial, this process will be upheld by any court. It's simply not possible because it was so blatantly executed.
And finally, question, what message would you send to Indian authorities, the Prime Minister of India, as they consider how to handle this extradition request?
I think they know very well how to handle this extradition request. I don't think the Indian government is going to respond to such an illegal request. I really don't have any opinion on that whatsoever because I have faith in the Indian democracy, in their belief in the rule of law. What should really concern India is that the Yunus regime, you had asked, who is propping them up? It is Jamaat-e-Islam, which are the largest Islamic party. They have released tens of thousands of terrorists that our government had convicted and sentenced to prison. They've released them. You have Lashkar-e-Taliban operating freely now, and they've taken credit and links have been found to their branch in Bangladesh for the recent terror attacks in Delhi. So I think Prime Minister Modi is probably very, very concerned about terrorism from Bangladesh right now.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.